This podcast provides a platform to discuss important questions and complex issues, challenge the status quo, and confront the boundaries of the establishment. I'm retired police chief Daniel Hahn. I went from being arrested at 16 to serving over 34 years in law enforcement. My goal is to keep you informed with news not being reported, voices not being heard, and the untold history of how we got here so that we can create a way forward. Well, let me read this quote from one of the leaders in the Greenwood district in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the home of Black Wall Street and also the home of the Greenwood Massacre, where hundreds of people were murdered, largely because of biases and racism. And to me, this is partly the importance of history and understanding how we got here. So a quote from John Hope Franklin is, if the house is to be set in order, if the house is to be set in order, one cannot begin with the present. He must begin with the past. And so as I teach history and facilitate these discussions on how we got here, you know, especially in California on the West Coast, I always hear that a lot of this stuff only happened in the past, distant past, or in the South. And it didn't happen in California. It didn't happen on the West Coast. Everything from slavery to some of the other discriminatory practices in various groups. But the reality is that stuff, that history, those actions and beliefs that we had in the past still impact us today. For example, we had redlining in Sacramento, and the redlined area was called the West End in downtown Sacramento. From like 1938 to 1949, housing prices in Sacramento went up 46%. But in the redlined area in that same time period, they went down 30%. So the minorities that lived in the redlined area, because they couldn't live in any other neighborhood in Sacramento, their home values actually went down. So their ability to build generational wealth, to send their kids to college, to fund different things was either eliminated or utterly impossible. We had colleges across our country that did not allow minority students to attend until the 60s. So while some of our society is getting educated and increasing their ability to build wealth, other parts of our society were intentionally withheld or prevented from enjoying some of those same benefits or participating in some of those things in our country that could support their families. So we just have to understand that. It's not to put blame anywhere. It's to understand that and do things that can correct that and enable people to enjoy and enter into those avenues in order to support their families, to build a better tomorrow for themselves and their children, and therefore will make our whole community stronger and more prosperous. I was shocked about just about everything that I learned about my own city. I was born in the city. I've lived here my entire life, and I came to learn that I didn't know very much about my city, at least the history of my city. So one of the more shocking things is I would have never guessed in my life until I did the history research that the Ku Klux Klan was in Sacramento. I too would have thought that was just in the South. But the second iteration of the Klan in the 1920s, we did have a Klan chapter here in Sacramento. And not only did we have a Klan chapter here in Sacramento, but one of their home bases was in my community, in Oak Park. One of the main places where they did cross-burning swearing-in ceremonies, if you will, was a building right across the street from McClatchy Park that I played basketball in just about every day of my youth. I had no idea. I passed by that building every single day. The other thing that surprised me is the leader of our local chapter of the Klan was the Sacramento police chief in 1920. The number two in charge of our local chapter was the Sacramento County Sheriff Deputy. And when you learn these things, you start to understand, you know, some of the things that built on this mistrust. And this was in the 1920s. So my grandfather, who I knew very well, he was alive in the 1920s. He was a grown man in the 1920s. He wasn't in Sacramento. But people I've known in my lifetime, so in other words, it's not that long ago, lived through this period. And if you knew our history, you'd know the city manager, Clyde Seavey at the time, who Seavey Circle's named after, who I didn't know that either growing up, was a staunch opponent of the Klan. And he did everything he could to terminate any city employees that were members or associates of the Klan. And he attempted actually to fire numerous city employees that were members of our local chapter of the Klan once he was able to confirm that. And he was rebuffed by the Sacramento City Council. They overturned his terminations. And so you start to see this history in our city is not unlike other parts of the country. And we have to accept that and understand that that is part of the building and compounding of this mistrust between communities and law enforcement, and specifically minority communities and certain neighborhoods in our city. So that was one of my biggest surprises, because that police chief's pictures hangs on the wall outside my door when I was police chief, and I walked by it every day. I had no idea that he was the leader of the Klan. I learned about in school, the Ku Klux Klan. I never learned that they were in my city. I never learned that they were on the West Coast and in northern states. I never learned that the person that carved Mount Rushmore was a Klan member, and the one that initiated the carving at Stone Mountain in Atlanta, Georgia. I had no idea that one of our most cherished monuments was carved by a Klan member who believed everything that the Klan believed. I know there's a lot of sentiment around our country, and I even hear it in some of the events that I speak at when people come up afterwards, that this isn't good. We shouldn't be going back on our history. We shouldn't be learning these things. And some people just flat out don't believe it. So luckily we have Google and those sort of things that can help them understand. But my response to that is, we tend to be selective on what history we want to know. We don't say that we shouldn't learn about World War II or World War I or 9/11 or Vietnam. We build statues and memorials to these things, as we should. So I just believe we should know all of our history. We shouldn't just know portions of our history. It's important to know all of it. And it's often very sensitive information. It's often emotional information. But I think the more we understand each other, the more we understand how we got here, the more it will actually bring us together. And I see that in these classes, that you can almost see the light bulbs coming on in people's face and their eyes, and they understand how we got here. And I think that's the first step on moving forward, as we start understanding each other, we start having compassion for each other, and we start caring about each other. And we don't think these stereotypes that we're told, that certain groups of people are just violent, certain groups of people are just more predisposed to these sort of things. We understand the reasons why they got here. And I think through that, we will have a better tomorrow. Thank you for listening to this episode of A Way Forward, and I look forward to the conversations and experiences that will benefit all of us, including myself, and will help our communities move forward.